the brutal execution of Anne Askew, England's most gruesome death of a woman. The hum of machinery filled the laboratory, a gentle, almost hypnotic sound that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Lena Royce's heartbeat. She adjusted her headset and glanced at the empty chamber around her. The immersive history reconstruction device was ready. Years of research had led to this moment. Today, she would walk in the footsteps of a woman who had defied the power of her age, Anne Askew. Lena had read every book, article, and paper on Anne. She knew the story well. A young woman in 16th century England, courageous and unyielding, who dared to speak her mind in a world dominated by men. But reading was one thing, living it was another. And that was the purpose of this experiment. With the empathy engine connected to her neural pathways, Lena would become Anne Askew. She took a deep breath and touched the activation panel. A soft green light pulsed under her fingers. Then, as if the world itself was folding in on her, Lena felt herself slipping. The lab, the machines, even the faint smell of coffee and metal vanished. When she opened her eyes, she was somewhere else entirely. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp stone. Narrow streets twisted between rows of buildings with crooked roofs. Market stalls lined the road, crowded with vendors shouting their wares. Fresh bread, bright fabrics, and shiny trinkets. People bustled about and their clothes were heavy, plain, and worn. Lena realized she could feel the weight of her own attire. A stiff gown clung to her and the shoes pinched her toes. She was no longer Lena Royce. She was Anne Askew. Her heart raced. The simulation had begun. Anne's life in the simulation was not a simple one. She quickly learned that words had power and danger. Every conversation, every glance could change the course of her day. The first encounter came quickly. A stern-looking woman at a market stall noticed Anne examining some brightly dyed cloth. "You there?" the woman said, her voice sharp. "Are you to buy or just waste my time?" Anne, or Lena as Anne, smiled politely. "I am looking, madam. The colors are beautiful." The woman's gaze softened slightly and she nodded. "Take care you do not pick only the bright ones, girl. Life is not always so kind as these colors." Lena felt a shiver of understanding. Even in a simple market transaction, there was wisdom. People survived not just by strength, but by careful observation, by respect, by learning to read the moods and rules of the world around them. Over the next few hours, Anne walked the streets, discovering the rhythms of her time. She spoke with blacksmiths, listened to the chatter of children playing in alleys, and watched women carry baskets of vegetables from market stalls. Everything seemed alive, yet tense. There was an unspoken pressure everywhere, a weight of rules and expectations pressing on every move she made. Then came the first test of courage. A group of city officials appeared, their uniforms stiff and perfect. They were watching the crowd with sharp eyes. One of them, a tall man with a pointed beard, approached Anne. "You there, girl," he said, looking her up and down. "Do you know the king's decree on the new teachings?" Anne felt a lump in her throat. In the simulation, she had a choice. She could lie, speak carefully, or tell the truth. The empathy engine made the decision heavier. She could feel the fear, the tension, the consequences as if they were real. I am learning what is right," she said slowly, choosing words that were careful but honest. "I wish to understand fully." The man's gaze lingered. For a moment it seemed as though time itself had stopped. Then he nodded curtly. "See that you do. Knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands." As he walked away, Lena felt her body relax, though her mind was racing. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. The afternoon passed in a series of similar tests. Anne navigated the market, learned small lessons from strangers, and even helped an old man carry a basket of apples. Each interaction was a subtle exercise in empathy and intelligence. She began to understand the hidden networks of her society, who could be trusted, who was indifferent, and who might betray her in a moment of weakness. By the time the sun dipped below the rooftops, Anne had discovered the heart of her world. Human courage was not always about fighting or defiance. Often, it was in listening, thinking, and choosing wisely. The empathy engine enhanced this feeling, letting Lena experience Anne's bravery rather than just imagining it. Night came swiftly, and Anne returned to the small room she called home. The flickering candlelight revealed simple furniture: a table, a chair, a small bed, and a chest of clothes. Here, away from the streets, she could think. She pulled out a small journal and began to write. In the simulation, writing was allowed, and in this moment it became a way to record lessons learned. Today I learned that courage is quiet. It does not always roar. It listens. It observes. It speaks truth when it matters most. The words felt alive on the page. Lena realized she could learn from Anne just as much as she could become her. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Anne's heart leaped. She opened it to find a young servant girl, timid but smiling. "Forgive me, milady," the girl whispered. "I have something for you, a message from Mistress Elizabeth." Anne took the folded paper. The handwriting was delicate yet precise. It read, "Trust is rare. Choose your friends carefully. Some dangers come not from enemies but from those closest to you." Lena's pulse quickened. Even in a simulation, the tension of choices and consequences was real. Every action mattered. Every interaction could change the course of her experience. The story was not just about surviving, but about understanding, planning, and navigating a complex world. She spent the night reading, thinking, and preparing for what tomorrow might bring. The streets of London were full of life, but they were also full of hidden challenges. Askew's courage would be tested in ways far beyond what Lena had imagined. As sleep claimed her in the small bed, Lena reflected on the first day of the simulation. The experience had been immersive, terrifying, and exhilarating. She realized that history was not just a series of events. It was a network of choices, courage, and human connections. Tomorrow, Anne would face new challenges. Interrogations, moral dilemmas, and moments of subtle danger awaited her. But for now, the young woman in the gown, and the historian inside her, had survived the first day. And in surviving, she had begun to understand what true courage meant. The candle flickered one last time before dying out, leaving only the quiet hum of the simulation. Somewhere in the virtual streets of London, Askew slept, unaware of how deeply her story would resonate across centuries. And somewhere in the lab, Lena Royce's mind was alive with anticipation. This was only the beginning. The morning light crept through the small window of Askew's room, spilling across the rough wooden floor. The candlelight from the night before had long since faded, leaving only the soft glow of dawn. Anne rose carefully, her thoughts heavy with yesterday's lessons. The streets of London were alive again, and she knew that today would test her in ways that went beyond simple observation. Stepping into the narrow alley outside, Anne felt the weight of her gown and the stiffness of her shoes. Every sound seemed louder in the quiet morning: the clatter of a cart wheel, the chatter of children, the distant cry of a vendor. She had grown used to the market's bustle, but today she felt as though the city itself was watching her. Her first encounter came sooner than expected. A group of scholars had gathered near the cathedral, engaged in heated debate. They spoke in hushed tones about teachings that were considered dangerous by the authorities. Anne paused, listening from the shadows, careful not to draw attention. One scholar, a man with spectacles perched on the tip of his nose, spoke passionately. "Truth cannot be hidden forever. Knowledge is for everyone, not only for the powerful." Anne's heart leapt. She felt a deep connection to these words, even though she was only beginning to understand their full meaning. The empathy engine made her feel every flicker of courage, fear, and hope that pulsed through the people around her. She realized that standing for truth required more than intelligence. It required careful observation, patience, and subtlety. A sudden movement caught her attention. A young boy stumbled into the path of a cart and Anne rushed forward instinctively, catching him just in time. The boy looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you, milady," he said, his voice trembling. Anne smiled, feeling a warmth she had not expected. Small acts of kindness, she realized, were also a form of courage. They could change someone's day, even their life, without the need for confrontation or defiance. After the incident, Anne continued toward the cathedral, where Mistress Elizabeth had requested a meeting. The woman waited in a quiet courtyard, her expression calm but serious. "Anne," she said softly, "your understanding of the world is growing. But courage is tested not only in action but in thought. Today, you must decide how far you will trust others and how far you will guard your own mind." Anne listened intently. Every word seemed to carry layers of meaning. She had already seen that even the smallest misstep could have consequences. Yet, she also felt a growing determination to act wisely, to think carefully, and to navigate the complex network of people around her. Mistress Elizabeth handed Anne a small, folded letter. "This contains instructions. Some may seem trivial, others important. Decide carefully which to follow and which to question." Anne opened the letter and read silently. It contained directions for subtle tasks: delivering a message to a merchant without drawing attention, observing a meeting of local officials, and noting unusual behaviors among neighbors. Each task seemed simple, yet the weight of choice made them significant. As she stepped out of the courtyard, Anne felt the first true taste of responsibility. She was no longer just observing, she was participating. Every decision could ripple through the simulation, shaping the story that would unfold. The first challenge led her to a busy marketplace. A merchant was displaying rare fabrics, but he looked worried, glancing repeatedly over his shoulder. Anne approached cautiously. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm. "I have a message for you from Mistress Elizabeth." The man's eyes widened, and he nodded quickly. Anne delivered the note without hesitation. Then she watched, her senses alert, as he tucked the message safely away and began to speak in hushed tones to a customer. She realized that even in small interactions, she could influence outcomes without force. Knowledge, timing, and discretion were her tools. Later, Anne encountered another test. A group of officials was inspecting the area, questioning vendors and passers-by. Their expressions were stern, their questions probing. Anne had to decide. Should she stay hidden or approach and speak carefully? She chose the latter. Approaching with calm confidence, she answered their questions honestly but cautiously, offering only what was necessary and nothing more. The officials nodded, apparently satisfied, and moved on. Anne exhaled in relief. The encounter reinforced what she had learned the day before. Courage was measured not by confrontation, but by thoughtfulness, presence, and strategic action. The afternoon brought another lesson. Anne was invited to a private conversation with Mistress Elizabeth, who had observed her progress throughout the morning. "You have shown intelligence and discretion," Elizabeth said, "but now comes the harder part. You must learn to read people, to understand intentions beyond words. Not all threats are obvious, and not all allies are easily seen." Anne nodded. She understood that the simulation was designed not to frighten, but to teach. Every interaction, every observation, every choice had purpose. Her courage was growing, but so too was her wisdom. The next task required subtlety and careful thinking. Anne had to navigate the streets to deliver a coded message to a woman across town. The code was simple, a pattern in the folding of the paper, but noticing it required attention. Anne observed the people around her, aware of their movements and expressions. She slipped through narrow lanes, careful not to draw notice. Finally, she reached the woman and handed over the folded note. The recipient smiled knowingly, understanding the message instantly. Anne felt a thrill of satisfaction. Her intelligence, observation, and courage had succeeded without confrontation. Evening came and Anne returned to her small room. She was exhausted, but her mind was alive with reflection. Sitting at the wooden table, she wrote in her journal, "Courage is not only in acts of defiance. It is in thought, in choice, in understanding others. Knowledge is a shield as much as it is a sword. Today I learned to see, to listen, and to act wisely." The empathy engine amplified these reflections. Lena, inside Anne, could feel the growth of confidence, the quiet satisfaction of mastering subtle challenges. The simulation was teaching her more than history. It was teaching the timeless value of human courage and intellect. Later that night, a soft knock came at the door. Anne opened it to find a young boy holding a small bundle. "For you, milady," he said shyly. Inside was a simple object, a carved wooden token, marked with symbols Anne had never seen before. She understood at once. It was a sign of trust, a token given only to those who had proven themselves wise and careful. Anne held it in her hand, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. Courage, she realized, was more than facing danger. It was also about earning trust, making choices carefully, and acting with integrity. The streets of London were quiet now, but Anne could hear the distant echoes of life, laughter, argument, and the murmur of the city. Each sound carried lessons, each person a story. The simulation was not just recreating history, it was revealing the complexity of human experience. As she lay down to sleep, Anne felt a deep sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps greater tests of courage, but she also felt ready. She had learned that intelligence, observation, and careful action could overcome obstacles without force, and she had begun to understand the strength of the human spirit. The candle flickered one last time before the flame died, leaving the room bathed in soft moonlight. Somewhere outside, the city slept, unaware of the quiet courage that walked its streets. And somewhere within the simulation, Lena Royce felt the pulse of history, alive with lessons that transcended time. Tomorrow, Anne would face new trials, tests of loyalty, insight, and moral courage. But for now, she rested, confident that each choice she made brought her closer to understanding the true measure of bravery. The world of 16th century London was vast and complex, but Anne Askew had learned to navigate it with intelligence and heart. She had discovered that courage was not just in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate actions. And in that knowledge, she felt the quiet triumph of human spirit. The morning sun rose slowly over the rooftops of London, spilling golden light across the cobblestone streets. Anne Askew stood in her small room, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Today felt different. The air carried a tension she could almost touch. She had grown used to the rhythms of the city, to careful observation and quiet acts of courage. But today, something greater awaited. Mistress Elizabeth had sent a note the night before, requesting Anne's presence at a gathering of local officials. The message was simple, but the meaning was clear. Anne would face her first true test of intellect, wit, and moral courage. She felt a nervous flutter in her chest, but knew that fear was not a signal to retreat. It was a sign that she must act with care. As she walked through the twisting streets, Anne noticed the usual life of the city unfolding. Merchants shouted, children ran with laughter, and women carried baskets of vegetables to the market. Yet beneath this familiar bustle, a subtle tension ran through the crowd. Officials in polished uniforms patrolled the streets, their eyes sharp, scanning for disobedience or error. When she arrived at the hall, Mistress Elizabeth was already there, waiting in a quiet corner. Her calm expression gave Anne a small measure of courage. "Anne," Elizabeth said softly, "today you will see the weight of words and the power of careful thought. Remember, courage is not only in speaking, but in choosing when to speak and when to listen." Anne nodded, her heart steadying. She followed Elizabeth into a large room where officials had gathered. The room smelled faintly of wax and polished wood. Long tables were arranged in a U-shape, and the officials sat behind them, their faces stern but attentive. The first official, a tall man with a sharp nose, spoke before Anne could even take a seat. "Miss Askew, we understand you have opinions on matters of faith and knowledge," he said. His voice was formal, controlled, yet heavy with expectation. "We are curious to hear them." Anne took a deep breath. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room, each gaze like a weight pressing on her shoulders. She remembered Mistress Elizabeth's words: "Courage is not only in speaking, but in choosing when to speak." She chose carefully, her voice steady but measured. "I believe," she said, "that understanding comes from asking questions, from observing carefully, and from listening to others. Knowledge should guide our actions, not fear." A murmur ran through the room. Some officials nodded slightly, others frowned. Anne's heart beat faster, but she held her posture and continued. "Questions allow us to see truth clearly," she said, "and truth, once known, can guide the choices we make for the good of our communities." The tall official leaned forward, his sharp eyes studying her. "And what if your questions disturb established order?" Anne thought for a moment. She could feel the tension building, as though the air itself had thickened. Then she answered, calmly but firmly. "Order that does not allow understanding is fragile. Strength comes from knowledge and careful thought. True guidance comes from wisdom, not fear." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then another official, older and quieter, spoke. "Miss Askew, your words are clever, but cleverness alone is not enough. Can you show us how knowledge guides action?" Anne's mind raced. This was more than a test of words. It was a test of insight. She remembered the lessons from the market, from helping the boy, from delivering the message discreetly. Courage was not only speaking boldly, but acting wisely. "I have observed," she began, "that small acts can prevent greater troubles. Helping those in need, understanding intentions before judging, and choosing allies carefully. All these actions build strength and prevent mistakes. Knowledge guides not just words, but our behavior." Another murmur swept the room. Some officials nodded, impressed. Others exchanged subtle glances. Anne felt the eyes of the tall official on her again, but she did not falter. "Very well," he said finally. "We will consider your observations, but remember, words are easy. Action is the true measure of courage." Anne nodded, understanding that the challenge was far from over. She had passed the first stage, but the test of action awaited, subtle and unseen. After the officials left, Mistress Elizabeth approached her with a small smile. "You have done well," she said. "But now comes the harder part. You must see not only what people say, but what they mean and what they might do next. Today, you will navigate choices with careful thought and insight." The next challenge led Anne to a quiet courtyard where neighbors and townspeople had gathered. A dispute had arisen over property boundaries, a seemingly simple matter, but one that could escalate if handled poorly. Anne had to mediate, to speak with tact and intelligence, ensuring fairness without confrontation. She listened to each side carefully, noticing tone, hesitation, and body language. Some spoke with anger, others with fear. Anne remained calm, her words measured and thoughtful. "Perhaps we can find a solution," she suggested gently, "that honors everyone's needs. If we consider what each person values, we may discover a way to share the land fairly." The townspeople paused, thinking. Slowly, they began to propose compromises, each idea building on the next. Anne guided the conversation, not by forcing her opinion, but by helping others see options they had not considered. By the time the sun was high, the dispute was resolved peacefully. Anne felt a quiet pride. Courage, she realized, was as much in guiding and listening as it was in speaking boldly. She had influenced outcomes, shaped decisions, and maintained integrity, all without anger or confrontation. The final challenge of the day came unexpectedly. Mistress Elizabeth handed her a small, sealed note with instructions. "You must deliver this message," Elizabeth said, "but the route is uncertain. People may ask questions. Choose your path carefully and remember that observation is your greatest tool." Anne folded the note and set out. The streets were busy, and officials patrolled as usual. She noticed patterns in their movements, subtle cues that allowed her to choose her path wisely. She passed quietly through alleys, observed the rhythm of the crowd, and avoided drawing attention. Finally, she reached the recipient, a scholar who had helped her understand hidden truths. Handing over the note, Anne saw the recipient's face light with understanding. The message was delivered, the lesson learned. Courage was not about confrontation, but about careful planning, observation, and precise action. Returning to her small room, Anne sat at the table, exhausted but exhilarated. She wrote in her journal, "Today I learned that courage is a crucible. It tests not only words but thought and action. Wisdom guides bravery, and patience strengthens resolve. Every choice matters, and understanding is the key to guiding others." The empathy engine amplified her reflections. Lena, inside Anne, felt the growth of insight and moral courage. She realized that history was more than events. It was the interplay of thought, choice, and human spirit. Night fell over the city, and Anne could hear the distant sounds of life, footsteps, laughter, and the occasional shout. The city pulsed with lessons, and she felt herself part of its living story. As she lay down to rest, Anne reflected on the day's challenges. She had faced scrutiny, guided others, and made choices that required careful thought and courage. She understood that courage was not always dramatic. It was subtle, patient, and wise. The candle flickered one last time before dying, leaving her room in gentle moonlight. Somewhere in the streets of London, life continued, unaware of the quiet heroism of a young woman navigating a world of rules, observation, and moral choices. Askew slept that night with a sense of purpose, knowing that tomorrow would bring new trials, perhaps even greater tests of courage and intellect. But she felt ready. She had faced her crucible, and in doing so, had begun to understand the true measure of bravery. And somewhere within the simulation, Lena Royce felt the pulse of history, alive with lessons that transcended time, revealing the enduring strength of human wisdom, courage, and heart. The morning light spilled softly across the rooftops of London, painting the cobblestone streets in shades of gold and gray. Askew rose from her simple bed, her mind buzzing with the lessons of the previous days. The simulation had already taught her courage, careful thought, and the importance of observation. Yet today, she felt a weight unlike any before. Mistress Elizabeth's note had arrived at dawn. "Today you must decide not only for yourself but for others. Your actions will leave a mark. Observe, choose wisely, and remember that courage can inspire more than fear." Anne's heart raced as she folded the note and tucked it into her gown. She understood the meaning immediately. Today's challenge would not test her words alone, nor her ability to act discreetly. It would test her understanding of legacy, the way a single choice could shape lives beyond her own. The city outside was alive, as always. Merchants prepared their stalls, children ran laughing through narrow alleys, and women carried baskets to market. But Anne noticed patterns today she had not seen before. The way officials moved through the streets, the subtle glances exchanged between neighbors, and the quiet nods of recognition from those who had come to trust her judgment. Her first task led her to a small courtyard where a group of townspeople had gathered. The dispute was minor, a disagreement over water access from a nearby well, but Anne knew that even small disputes could escalate. She listened carefully to both sides, noting tone, hesitation, and unspoken worries. "Perhaps," she suggested softly, "we might take turns using the well in a way that honors each household. If we document the schedule and communicate clearly, no one will be left without water." The villagers exchanged thoughtful looks. Slowly, they began to agree, each adding small suggestions that improved the plan. Anne guided the conversation, not with authority but with understanding. By the time she left, the dispute was resolved peacefully, and she realized that the choices she made could influence harmony in her community. Next, Anne was directed to a larger gathering, a meeting of scholars, merchants, and local officials. The room buzzed with quiet tension. Discussions about new ideas, trade, and governance had begun to stir debates that were both passionate and fragile. Anne's task was subtle, to introduce ideas that would encourage collaboration, honesty, and understanding. Standing quietly, Anne observed the room. She noticed a young merchant struggling to speak against a more powerful official. She understood immediately that courage was not always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet nudge, a gentle encouragement that allowed someone else to shine. Approaching the young merchant, Anne whispered advice. Speak your thoughts clearly. Focus on facts, not fear. Your ideas are valuable and they will be heard. The merchant nodded, took a deep breath, and addressed the room with calm authority. Anne watched as others listened, impressed by the clarity and honesty of his words. The officials began to respond respectfully, and a productive discussion unfolded. Anne realized that her influence was multiplying. Her courage, patience, and guidance allowed others to act with confidence. The empathy engine made her feel every subtle ripple of impact, every spark of trust and understanding that spread through the room. As the day progressed, Anne received a final challenge. Mistress Elizabeth handed her a sealed envelope with no explanation, only a single line written on the outside. Decide what story will be remembered. Anne felt the weight of the words. She opened the envelope and found a collection of letters, notes, and observations from people across the city. Some described acts of kindness, others struggles with injustice, and many spoke of fear, hope, and courage. Anne understood immediately. Her task was not to judge, but to choose which stories would be preserved, which lessons would inspire future generations. She spent hours reading, reflecting, and organizing the documents. Each story had merit, but she knew that history remembered only what was chosen carefully. Her decisions would shape the understanding of courage, morality, and human spirit for those who would come after her. Finally, she began to write. Her pen moved steadily across the pages, guided by wisdom, observation, and moral courage. She focused on acts of integrity, quiet heroism, and the power of thought over force. She highlighted the courage of individuals who spoke truth, who helped others, and who made choices with careful thought and compassion. By evening, her work was complete. Anne looked over the pages, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The legacy she was creating was not one of fear, punishment, or violence, but of courage, wisdom, and human connection. She had chosen to honor those who acted with integrity, who guided others with knowledge, and who inspired change without harm. Mistress Elizabeth approached, her expression warm. "You have done well," she said. "You understand that courage is not only in facing danger but in shaping the world with wisdom and care. Your choices today will be remembered, not for the battles you fought, but for the guidance you gave, the trust you earned, and the lives you touched." Anne nodded, feeling the truth of the words. The simulation had taught her many lessons: the value of observation, the importance of careful action, and the strength of quiet courage. But today, she had learned the power of legacy, the way one person's choices could influence generations. The city outside had grown quiet as night fell. Anne walked through the streets, noticing the subtle ways in which her influence had shaped the day. Disputes had been resolved peacefully, voices had been heard, and trust had been strengthened. She understood that the measure of courage was not in grand gestures alone, but in the impact one could have on the lives of others. Returning to her small room, Anne wrote one final entry in her journal for the day. Courage is a legacy. Every choice matters. What we do, how we act, and the care with which we guide others can echo far beyond our own lives. Today I learned that true courage inspires, teaches, and strengthens others. It leaves a mark that time cannot erase. The empathy engine pulsed softly, amplifying her understanding. Lena, inside Anne, felt the growth of insight and purpose. She realized that history was not only a collection of events, but a living network of choices, wisdom, and influence. Anne's actions, small and deliberate, had shaped a future within the simulation that celebrated the best of human spirit. As she lay down to rest, Anne reflected on the days she had spent in the city. Each challenge, each observation, each choice had taught her something new. Courage was not simple. It was quiet, thoughtful, and deliberate. It required understanding, empathy, and patience, and it could shape the lives of others in ways that force or fear never could. The candle flickered one last time before dying, leaving her room in gentle moonlight. Somewhere in the streets of London, life continued, guided by the quiet influence of a young woman who had chosen wisely, acted with care, and inspired courage. Askew slept with a deep sense of purpose. Tomorrow, the simulation would reach its final stage, testing everything she had learned about courage, morality, and legacy. She knew that the greatest challenge was yet to come, and she felt ready to meet it with wisdom, patience, and unwavering integrity. And somewhere within the simulation, Lena Royce felt the pulse of history more clearly than ever. The lessons of courage, intellect, and moral choice were alive, showing her that the human spirit, when guided by thought and integrity, could shape a world beyond fear and violence. Askew had discovered that true heroism was not in grand battles or dramatic acts, but in the quiet power of guiding, understanding, and inspiring others. And in that realization, she had begun to leave a legacy that would resonate far beyond her time. The city slept, but the influence of her courage echoed through its streets, invisible yet unmistakable. And somewhere within the quiet hum of the simulation, Lena Royce knew that history itself was alive, shaped by choices, guided by wisdom, and remembered for the courage of those who acted with heart. The dawn of the final day in London broke softly, painting the cobblestone streets with pale gold. Askew rose from her small bed, a sense of anticipation mingling with calm resolve. This was the culmination of her journey. The lessons of courage, wisdom, and subtle action had prepared her, but today, the simulation would test her in a way she had not yet experienced. Mistress Elizabeth's note had been brief. Today, you will see the consequences of your choices. Observe carefully, act wisely, and understand the weight of influence. Your courage and intellect will be tested together. Anne folded the note and tucked it into her gown. She felt a familiar hum within her chest, the pulse of anticipation. Each step she took through the narrow streets seemed heavier, as if the city itself was aware that this day would matter most. The morning was alive with activity. Vendors called out to passers-by, children chased each other in the alleyways, and women carried baskets filled with produce. But the ordinary rhythms of the city carried subtle signs that Anne's earlier actions had begun to ripple outward. Neighbors smiled quietly at each other, merchants whispered cautiously, and officials moved through the streets with a softer vigilance. The world around her was alive with the consequences of her careful guidance. Her first challenge of the day arrived sooner than expected. A meeting had been arranged with scholars, officials, and townspeople in a grand hall near the cathedral. Anne entered to find a room buzzing with nervous energy. People spoke quietly, glancing at one another with uncertainty. It was clear that tensions lingered from debates of previous days. Anne understood instantly that this was more than a test of words or observation. Today, she would see whether the lessons she had learned, courage, patience, moral reasoning, could guide a community toward understanding and cooperation. She took a deep breath and began to move among the groups, listening carefully to their concerns. One scholar was frustrated by a trade dispute, while a young woman worried about access to learning for her children. Anne noted every detail, every subtle hesitation, and every flicker of emotion. Perhaps, Anne suggested softly, addressing both groups, we can find solutions that respect everyone's needs. If we combine careful planning with honesty, all voices can be heard and valued. A murmur ran through the room. Some looked skeptical while others nodded thoughtfully. Anne realized that her role was not to command but to guide. Courage, she understood, was not always in speaking loudly. It was in helping others find their strength. Slowly, the room began to respond. Discussions unfolded with calm reasoning. Scholars shared ideas, merchants proposed compromises, and officials listened attentively. Anne moved between groups, encouraging dialogue and subtle collaboration. The room, once tense, began to hum with quiet understanding. After hours of careful mediation, a consensus emerged. Decisions were made that respected each perspective. Anne's guidance had helped people act thoughtfully rather than impulsively. The empathy engine allowed Lena to feel every subtle ripple of relief, understanding, and trust. She realized that human courage was not always dramatic. It often flourished in quiet leadership and careful decision-making. Yet, the final test was not over. Mistress Elizabeth approached with a small, sealed envelope, the last part of Anne's journey. "Inside this envelope," Elizabeth said gently, "is a choice that will define your legacy within this simulation. Remember, courage is measured not only in action, but in the way you shape the world around you. Decide with wisdom." Anne took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with two options written in clear script. The first option allowed her to reveal everything she had observed and influenced to the officials, ensuring immediate recognition, but risking conflict and misunderstanding. The second option was subtler. She could preserve her guidance quietly, letting her influence continue through the choices of others without direct exposure. Anne paused, feeling the weight of the decision. The first option promised personal acknowledgement, but it risked disrupting the harmony she had worked so carefully to build. The second offered continuity, trust, and the chance for others to act with integrity independently. Courage, she realized, was not in seeking recognition. It was in shaping the world wisely. After a long moment of reflection, Anne chose the second option. She folded the paper carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. The choice was quiet, deliberate, and guided by thought, compassion, and foresight. Mistress Elizabeth smiled, as if she already understood the decision. "You have chosen wisely," she said. "True courage leaves a mark not for fame, but for the enduring influence it creates. You have guided others to act with integrity, thoughtfulness, and bravery. That is a legacy that time cannot erase." Anne felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced challenges of courage, intellect, and moral choice. She had navigated the subtle complexities of human interaction and learned the quiet power of guiding others toward wisdom. She had seen that influence, when used thoughtfully, could ripple across generations. The streets of London now seemed alive in a new way. Disputes were resolved, voices were heard, and people acted with confidence. Anne realized that her choices had created a small but meaningful network of trust and understanding. The city was no longer just a backdrop. It was a living testament to the quiet heroism of thought and integrity. Returning to her small room, Anne wrote her final journal entry in the simulation. "Courage is measured not by recognition, but by influence. Wisdom guides bravery. Patience strengthens resolve. Every choice matters, and the way we shape the world reflects the true measure of our spirit. Today I learned that heroism can be quiet, deliberate, and lasting." The empathy engine pulsed softly, transmitting the full depth of Anne's understanding to Lena Royce. She felt the culmination of every lesson learned: observation, patience, insight, moral courage, and the power of legacy. It was a lesson that transcended time, showing the enduring strength of the human mind and heart. As the simulation began to wind down, the streets, the people, and even the sounds of London faded gently into a soft hum. Anne felt herself lifted out of the recreated world, returning to the laboratory where it all began. The machines buzzed quietly, the green light of the activation panel pulsing once more. Lena opened her eyes. She was back in the lab, but the experience remained alive in her mind. She could still feel the pulse of the city, the weight of choices, and the quiet strength of human courage. Every step she had taken as Askew had taught her something profound. That heroism was not always dramatic, that wisdom could guide bravery, and that even small acts could shape a world. She removed the headset slowly, taking in the hum of machines and the soft light of the lab. The simulation had ended, but the lessons remained. Lena felt a surge of inspiration. She knew that she would carry Anne's courage forward into her own life, applying careful thought, moral integrity, and quiet leadership in ways that could influence those around her. Mistress Elizabeth, appearing now as a mentor within the simulation's interface, spoke softly. "You have learned what few ever understand. Courage is a network, a ripple, a quiet force that shapes the world. It is measured not in applause or recognition, but in the lives it touches and the trust it builds. You have embodied that, and the world, past and future, will remember it in spirit." Lena nodded, feeling the truth of the words deep within her. History was not merely a record of events, it was a reflection of human courage, intellect, and moral choice. And Anne Askew, through her simulated experience, had shown that even a single individual, acting thoughtfully and bravely, could leave a legacy that transcended time. As Lena stepped out of the lab, the sunlight outside seemed warmer, more alive. She looked at the bustling city beyond the doors, at people walking with purpose, speaking with intent, and carrying out small acts of kindness and courage. The world, she realized, was full of Anne Askews, quiet heroes who shaped life not through force, but through thought, empathy, and integrity. And in that understanding, Lena felt hope, inspiration, and a renewed sense of purpose. She carried with her the pulse of history, the quiet power of human courage, and the knowledge that every choice mattered. Anne Askew's story, though experienced within a simulation, had taught a truth that could never fade. Heroism was found not in violence or spectacle, but in thoughtfulness, moral courage, and the careful shaping of the world for the better. Lena smiled, knowing that the lessons she had learned as Anne Askew would guide her actions, influence others, and leave ripples that could last far beyond her own life. The simulation had ended, but the legacy of courage, patient, deliberate, and wise, was eternal. The lab was silent, the machines resting, and outside, life continued. Yet somewhere in the quiet hum of history, Anne Askew's courage remained alive, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. And in that realization, Lena knew that the story of one woman, her bravery, her wisdom, and her quiet influence, had become a story for all time.